You're looking at a 63-year-old homeless woman named Carol Ann Reyes. That's her wandering in the street on the right side of your screen. The picture may seem unremarkable, but the story that goes with it is disturbing. Reyes had just been discharged from Kaiser Permanente Bellflower Hospital, where after taking a fall, she'd been treated for 3 days. The hospital confirms she was put in a taxi and the driver was told to take her to Skid Row. Why is she wearing little more than a hospital gown? Because the hospital admits they'd lost her clothes and sent her away without pants or even shoes. They did, however, give her a diaper.
The cab came this way, did a U-turn, pulled around, and stopped. The driver didn't even get out of the car. The back door opened, and this little lady got out in her hospital gown.
Reverend Andy Bales runs the Union Rescue Mission, the biggest shelter in Skid Row, a 50-square-block area home to some 11,000 people, with the highest concentration of homeless in the country.
When you saw Carol Ann Reyes get out of the taxi, were you surprised?
I was stunned and shocked and frozen for a moment. I couldn't believe my eyes. She was really confused.
She was confused, investigators later found, because she was suffering from dementia. That shouldn't have come as a surprise to Kaiser Hospital officials, however. Their own medical records show Reyes was disoriented as to time and place. Her speech was slurred, she had extremely high blood pressure, and a persistent cough and fever. Even with these medical problems, they decided to discharge her and sent her to the streets of Skid Row.
They're dumping a 62-year-old woman with dementia in the heart of Skid Row. That's what's going on, and it's shocking, and it's criminal.
Rocky Delgadillo is the Los Angeles city attorney. His office is investigating more than 50 cases of alleged homeless dumping on Skid Row.
These may be the perfect victims, because a homeless individual dumped on Skid Row disappears into the chaos of Skid Row within minutes. It's hard for us to find them and then get the evidence that we need.
What should hospitals do with homeless patients? The California Health Code requires all hospitals to make appropriate arrangements for post-hospital care and for continuing health care requirements before discharging any patient. Kaiser didn't do that in Carol Ann Reyes' case, Delgadillo says. She was sent to Skid Row last March without any medication or instructions for follow-up care.
What's it like down there?
Cardboard shanties, urine everywhere. It's a dangerous place both physically as well as the drug dealers that congregate on Skid Row, gangs that come there to find their easy prey.
Not the kind of place elderly women with dementia should be.
No, in fact, if she'd made it around the corner, she might not be with us today.
Carol Ann Reyes is with us today because a worker from Bales' mission rescued her from the street. She's now under the protection of a court-appointed conservator. She suffers from mild dementia and other medical problems. The conservator allowed us to videotape her meeting her lawyer, but not to ask her any questions. Her lawyers have filed suit against Kaiser Hospital.
Say it.
Yeah, I know.
Before she was hospitalized, Reyes had been sleeping in this park, 16 miles away from the crime-ridden streets of Skid Row.
Sometimes individuals end up here that are just released from county jail.
Deputy City Attorney Jose Egurbide, who investigates hospital dumping cases, showed us around.
You know, this is the end of the line for many.
Egurbide is part of a city effort to clean up Skid Row.
What are the problems the people here are dealing with?
The people living on the street here, Anderson, about over 40% of them have mental illness issues. And, you know, over 50% of them have some type of addiction. So
Heroin, crack.
Correct. Heroin, crack, meth.
Spend a few hours here like we did, and you quickly see how chaotic these streets are. Despite a heavy law enforcement presence, police must wage a constant battle to maintain some semblance of order.
No, but just leave me alone, man. I'm cool.
It's a pretty typical day on Skid Row. This man has passed out, perhaps hit his head, maybe OD'd. They're not sure. They're called an ambulance for him. Meanwhile, the police officer has to leave because there was a stabbing a short time ago on this block, and he believes that the suspect in the stabbing is standing about 100 or 200 feet away from where I am right now.
Violence is nothing new to those living on Skid Row. and neither are stories about hospital dumping.
Have you heard about this dumping thing?
Oh, hell yeah. It's kind of new.
Yeah? Been going on a long time?
Long time. It's just got nosy because they've been bringing them down in hospital gowns.
Homeless people, however, don't make the strongest witnesses in court. So to get hard evidence of dumping, workers at several shelters, including the Union Rescue Mission, installed special cameras on the street to try to capture it. They call them dumping cams.
This was not to stop crime. It was intentionally set up to stop hospital drop-offs or to track hospital drop-offs.
What's the importance of the cameras?
You know, people have talked about this. It's been happening for over 20 years, but it wasn't until America saw a hospital drop-off on camera that it brought the kind of attention that it has brought.
After the video of Reyes's dumping was made public, Diana Bonta, a Kaiser vice president, showed up at a Skid Row press conference.
I want to apologize to this patient. I want to sincerely apologize. I want to apologize as well to the community. I want to apologize to my colleagues and to those of you gathered here today. It is not in keeping with the policies of Kaiser Permanente.
Kaiser officials acknowledged arrangements should have been made to care for Reyes at a mission. They declined our request for an interview, but said in a statement that from now on they'll use vans with hospital staff instead of taxis to deliver discharged patients to missions.
It wouldn't have mattered if they put Caroline Reyes in a limousine. They still dumped her on Skid Row.
This past November, City Attorney Delgadillo filed civil and criminal charges against Kaiser Hospital.
The complaint charged Kaiser with false imprisonment and dependent adult endangerment relating to Kaiser's shameful and abusive conduct in dumping Caroline Reyes on Skid Row.
You might think with all the attention the Reyes case got that hospitals would be particularly careful in how they discharge homeless patients. But just a few months later, another hospital's treatment of another patient made headlines. Gabino Olvera is a 41-year-old paraplegic. He lives in his car, which is equipped with hand controls. He keeps his wheelchair on the back seat. Olvera got into a minor traffic accident on February 7th. He was brought to Hollywood Presbyterian Hospital, where he was treated for bruises. Hospital officials say he was discharged in the middle of the night and taken by ambulance to an address Olvera told them was his home. It turned out to be the Midnight Mission, one of the oldest on Skid Row. The mission's dumping camera shows paramedics bringing Olvera, strapped to a gurney, inside. Staff there said they couldn't care for a paraplegic, so paramedics wheeled him back to the ambulance and took him back to Hollywood Presbyterian. And that's when Olvera's troubles really began. The hospital acknowledges he sat in their waiting room for 8 hours. When the morning shift took over, he was put in a van and sent right back to the same Skid Row address. He never made it that far, however. 4 blocks away from the Midnight Mission, he was dumped in the street.
This is where Gabino Olvera was dumped.
That's right. This is a scene.
Deputy City Attorney Edgar Bide arrived with police minutes later.
You know, the witnesses were saying a van pulled up, individual, basically fell out of it, and while the driver was just standing by and, not doing anything to help him, was literally crawling on his hands. Paraplegic man, no use of his legs, and the van just sped off.
No wheelchair.
No wheelchair, no walker, and no empathy whatsoever for this individual by the driver, apparently.
That was the wrong thing to do, obviously.
Kaylor Schemberger, the head of Hollywood Presbyterian, says the woman who drove the van made a big mistake.
She violated hospital policy. She should not have dropped the patient off at that location.
Your hospital left this man, Gabino Olvera, on the street. He's paraplegic, didn't give him a walker, didn't give him a wheelchair. How is that possible?
Well, Anderson, let me tell you straight up that we're as shocked and outraged about this incident as anybody.
So the hospital didn't think that a paraplegic man would need a wheelchair?
Well, the driver asked at that time, what about your wheelchair? And he said, don't worry about it. Yeah, I have one at my home. Just take me there.
His home was a car.
Well, we didn't know that at the time. When he came in, he gave us an address and told us that was his home. And that was the address that he instructed the driver to take him to.
That address was the Midnight Mission. The hospital's night shift workers knew that because they'd already tried to take him there. Schemberger says they never told the morning shift.
Clearly, the communication between the two shifts is one area that fell down, and we've implemented a number of new policies to address those issues. All I can tell you, Anderson, that this hospital has very strict policies with regard to how we transport patients, and this particular situation was an anomaly.
How strict, though, can the policies really be if they seem to have, at least in this case, been pretty much ignored?
You know, we're dealing with human nature, and a bad decision was made on the part of that van driver.
And she's the only one who's made a bad decision here?
Well, she's the one that made the decision to drop the patient off.
And to those who say that you're basically making a scapegoat of this low-paid van driver?
I don't think anybody's trying to make any scapegoats out of anybody.
Has anyone else been disciplined? Anyone else who, you know, the various shifts of the people in the emergency room or who saw this patient, anyone else been disciplined?
No.
Schemberger points out that hospital care for the homeless is only part of a much larger problem. In Los Angeles County, about 88,000 people don't have a roof over their heads on any given day. Schemberger says there simply aren't enough shelters and clinics to care for them.
When these people are discharged from a medical facility, they need a place to go, and we need a place to take them to that can accommodate their needs.
Do you think the hospitals are just an easy target?
Well, I think we're being unfairly pursued in this particular issue. After all, you know, we're here to take care of their medical needs, not their housing needs.